Welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. We're live here on ESPN Plus. I'm Dan Thomas, joined in the studio today by Craig Burley and Shaka Hislop. We'll kick things off with the game that's just finished in dramatic style at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea taking on Newcastle in the Carabao Cup quarter-final as Chelsea are through to this year's Carabao Cup semi-finals, defeating Newcastle 4-2 on penalties. Well, a big game like that means a lot of people. Well, that's exactly what we've got. Take a look at this. Ian Darke is with us, as is Frank Leboeuf. But let's go pitch side to Nedum Onuoha at Stamford Bridge. Nedum, it looked for the moment, well, for a lot of the game, that Chelsea were going to blow this.
I think yes and no, to be honest, Dan. I think as far as the flow of the game goes, that second half, Newcastle very much on the back foot. I think they ended up having one shot in that second half. Chelsea were probing, they were trying to move the ball, they were making positive changes. There's a huge buzz in here as well when Nkunku came on, and I think they did have that element of belief, and obviously it comes down to a mistake, unfortunately, from Kieran Trippier. But the side was believing, and it felt like the crowd were sticking with them. The players, they kept pushing, the manager on the side stayed patient. I suppose you've got to keep going. It's not over until that final whistle sounds, and in the end, I would say they deserved that game, that win rather. And I know it went down to penalties, and it's a look at the draw, look at penalties and all that stuff, but I think today, overall, they were the better side, and to see them in the next round, I think it's fully deserved.
We've seen this, haven't we, from Newcastle a bit over the last few weeks. They just get evidently tired as the game goes on.
I think they're struggling to play any other way against so-called better sides at the moment, particularly on the road. We saw it at Tottenham, who are a better side than Chelsea at the moment. There's no doubt about that. And it was no surprise Chelsea were in the ascendancy in terms of possession. A few huffing and puffing in the second half, but it really, if we're being honest, they're in this semi-final because one of the best full-backs in the Premier League, and he is, but he's having a bad time. Kieran Trippier made probably as bad an error as he's going to make all season, and that's the difference. He's almost second-guessing himself at the moment. All the things that Trippier just does naturally and has been doing naturally for years, I think it's in his mind. He knows he's going through a bad period, and Chelsea go into the semi-final, but nothing convincing for me still about the performance, bearing in mind who they're playing against, how tired and on the last legs Newcastle are with the games they've played, with the injuries, with Europe, which Chelsea don't have. But you have to latch on to mistakes, and Newcastle's big one is they just did not see this game out, and that was the difference. If they had a little bit more game awareness, they would have been playing a semi-final.
From a tactical perspective, I'm not sure Newcastle could have played this any other way. As I said before the game, Callum Wilson is not Alexander Isak. He's not going to run in behind defenders, or given the way the first goal came, shouldn't just be running in behind defenders and troubling them with space and behind in that manner. And then without Joe Linton, Guimaraes has to sit a whole lot deeper. And if Callum Wilson, as a result, doesn't drop even deeper than he would naturally like to, there's a big gap between striker and midfield. So inevitably, Newcastle have to sit deep and try to break when they can. But you get your goal early on. You sit back and you defend what you have. You don't take any unnecessary chances. And it was a mistake that caused the goal. And while Nedum is making the point that Chelsea were probably more deserving, Dubravka made one save in the second half, or one save of any note in the second half, until the goal comes. So you do feel for Newcastle, and given how the game kind of played out, but it's been that kind of month for Kieran
I think
Trippier.
it's where Newcastle are at the moment, if we're being honest, right? They got back on the front foot for a while there. They had that brilliant win against PSG a few weeks ago, and it started to pick momentum, and then the injuries started to come one after the other, and then they've looked tired. They've had all these games, the Cup, the Champions League, back to the league, and when you've got your most reliable professional in the dressing room starting to make the kind of mistakes that are basic, Everton, Tottenham, and now this big mistake in the Carabao Cup quarter-final, I think that tells you the story, because prior to the month of December, Kieran Trippier probably had made, lucky if he's made one mistake of any note all season, and that's kind of where Newcastle are.
But of course, both goals came as a result of mistakes. Frank, were you swearing at the TV in French or English when Chelsea conceded that opening goal?
No, because I already know that football is made of mistakes, and if you don't have any mistakes, you don't have any goals, and it's part of it. It's just hard to have a convincing analysis about that game where it's all about mistakes. It's all about not being convincing. It's all about being clumsy. I know I have some sympathy for Trippier because, I mean, it happens like 2 times to him. And how Eddie Howe can ask him to shoot a penalty when psychologically the guy is completely upside down. I don't understand that. He should have said, no, I'm sorry. No, you don't. I don't want you to go for even the worst. What happened? It's going to be terrible for him in the dressing room right now. And when he got on his way back to Newcastle, you made the mistake. You're the guy who missed the penalty. Even if you are one of the top player in your position and an international players, you're going to start wondering about what's going wrong with you. And I think Badiashile will have an easy time to forget about it because Chelsea won. But for Trippier, it's becoming quite heavy.
Obviously, he said he'd take the penalty for redemption, Nedum. When he was walking up before the penalty takers were assigned, could you sense that?
So, Kieran Trippier is great from a dead ball position, and he's good enough to be able to score a penalty. I think the fact that he missed the target was the biggest shock for me, and I understand what Frank's saying because his mind isn't in a great place. But for some people, they want to try and break that by doing something positive, and this was his opportunity to do so. So I'm devastated for him, and I think all the guys know that who've played, or just people who just played in general. You can make mistakes, but it's when those mistakes lead to goals that you really start to cast sort of doubts over yourself. And with Kieran himself, the mistakes he's made recently, you can see it's little elements of the indecision. Whereas normally he's one of the most convicted players. He knows exactly what he wants to do, whether it's to pass short, to pass long, to go and make a tackle, to take a step back. But unfortunately, in some of these key moments, he's just caught in between stalls now. And even for the penalty, if he was going to miss a penalty, I would not think he's going to miss the target. That's how good a player he is, and I thought he's still going to score. So I'm devastated for him. I'm sure he's got it for himself and for his teammates, and he's just going to have to try and find a way to get through this. But the only way to do that is just to approach the challenge head on, in my opinion.
Would you have taken it,
just quickly before we go to Ian, the mindset of let's be honest, it was a big game. It was Carabao Cup quarter-final. Kieran Trippier will get over it, right? He's played in the World Cup semi-final, right? He's made mistakes before in his career. He'll get over it. But here's the mindset of an experienced player who is one of the best, as the guys mentioned, one of the best dead ball takers in the game from free kicks. We know he's a very good striker of the football. But the mindset is of a senior player, right? I've made a big mistake. Do I shirk my responsibility and send up somebody else who's less experienced, and we get put out, and then actually the coach journey back to Newcastle is worse. If your team get put out and you've sat back and you did not have the stomach to get up and take it. And that's the mindset of an experienced player. Yes, he's missed it, hindsight and all that, but if he had said to them, I've buckled here, then he would have felt worse. So he had to step up as one of the main guys.
To that point, if Kieran Trippier is asked to take a penalty and he says, no, I don't want it, I have more questions of Kieran Trippier. I have an issue with Eddie Howe in sending him to take the penalty. I think this is when Eddie Howe, as manager, says, Kieran, I'll keep you for 6 or 7 or whatever it may be if it gets to sudden death. Because you have to recognize that. Don't give it to Kieran Trippier to make that decision. Because I'm sure I speak for every single one of us who've played the game. You ask us to take a penalty, we'll take it. We will take it. But this is where
I've seen a few who would take a back step.
I would. Let's speak to my own confidence from 12 yards out. But the point being that most professionals will. They'll step up. They'll take the responsibility. They don't shirk that. As I said before, as professionals, we have sometimes a fatal sense of self-belief. But that's when Eddie Howe needs to recognize that this is a player who's hurting. Let me pull him back a little bit. Let me have a quiet conversation with him. If it gets to sudden death, I convince him that this is when he gets his moment.
But this is not about the penalty miss. It's about the mistake at the back post.
Right. Because anyone can miss a penalty.
Yeah, anyone.
I suppose anybody can make a big mistake, but it really boils down to when you look at the game clock, the ball in. He wasn't under any pressure from Mudryk. He could have done a couple of different things. The only thing that was going to kill him was the decision that he made was
Could
to
have put that ball anywhere
nod
else.
it down. He could have nodded it to the edge of the box, would have said,
Anywhere
it wasn't
else.
a very good clearance, but somebody then has to whip it in from 20 yards. He could have nodded it out for a corner, then you regroup. They could score from of course they could score from the corner, but at least you've done your job. The only thing he couldn't do was what he did, and that's what cost him.
And why this is a big talking point, Ian, is of course because it isn't an anomaly, because what we've seen over recent weeks from the Englishman.
Yeah, well, Gareth Southgate calls Kieran Trippier his soldier, doesn't he? The most reliable guy in the England camp. But I think, all these injuries that Newcastle have had, and they've had the heartbreak of Europe, they're playing so much football. I think it's just a bit of mental tiredness for Trippier there. I think there was a moment of indecision. 99 times out of 100, he knows exactly how to deal with that situation. But there's indecision. He makes a wrong decision. Mudryk's equalised in stoppage time, and Chelsea have got the momentum. And, to add to his horror story, he misses from the spot as well. But he's a great dead ball taker, isn't he? All the rest of the time, specialist at it. But just one of those nights. I wonder if this is a bit of a turning point for Chelsea as well, getting through to a semi-final, and with Nkunku, who's going to be important, back fit again.
Nedum, what was it like? You mentioned that the atmosphere was a little flat in the first half. How did Mudryk's goal and then the penalty shootout victory change that?
They were bouncing, all the fans staying, they had that element of belief. And they were, as I said, they were really excited about seeing Nkunku. So when he came on, they were energised. And I think they kind of stuck with the players because even though, Shaka said Dubravka only had to make one save in the second half, they were pushing. And as a consequence, they were believing in it. And I think some of that is obviously to do with the fact that Newcastle very much went onto the back foot. And I think there were little moments in the game that did matter. I think seeing Anthony Gordon go off for Newcastle was a big part for them in terms of Newcastle being able to maybe hit them on the break. Because we've seen this season, he's so good for them going that other way. So Newcastle were very much on the back foot. Chelsea were on the front foot. They were probing.